Okay, so after Reagan was George Herbert Walker Bush. So the Democrats regained control of the Senate in 1986, and they expected that the Iran Contra scandal and the huge deficits under Reagan would hurt the Republicans in the presidential race of 1988. Michael Dukakis, governor of Massachusetts, won the Democratic nomination and balanced the ticket by selecting Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas as his running mate. The Republicans nominated Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush, and a young Indiana senator, Dan Quayle. Bush did not have Reagan's ease in front of the camera, but he quickly overtook an expressionless Dukakis by charging that the Democrat was soft on crime for furloughing criminals and weak on national defense. He appealed to voters by promising not to raise taxes. He ran on the slogan, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And Republicans won in 1988. The Democratic majorities in the House and Senate were there, and that led to legislative gridlock in Washington. In China, we have the Tiananmen Square incident in the spring of 1989, where pro-democracy students demonstrated for freedom in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Chinese Communist government crushed the protest with tanks, killing hundreds under the cover of night. In Eastern Europe, Gorbachev declared that he would no longer support communist governments of Eastern Europe with Soviet armed forces. So in 1989, we have Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Romania becoming independent nations. And in 1989, communists in East Germany were forced out of power after protesters tore down the Berlin Wall. In October of 1990, the two Germanys were reunited with the blessing of NATO and the Soviet Union. In 1990, the Soviet Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared their independence. And in December of 1991, there was a failed coup against Gorbachev by communist hardliners. That led to remaining republics being dissolved in the Soviet Union, and it essentially led to a leader with no country because Gorbachev was the leader of the Soviet Union as a whole. Boris Yeltsin was the president of the Russian Republic. He joined with 9 former Soviet republics to form a loose confederation, the Commonwealth of Independent States, or the CIS. They disbanded the Communist Party and attempted to establish a democracy and a free market economy. In 1991, Bush and Gorbachev signed the START I agreement, which reduced the number of nuclear warheads to under 10,000 for each side. And in late 92, Bush and Yeltsin agreed to START II, which reduced the number of nuclear weapons to just over 3,000 each and offered U.S. assistance to the troubled Russian economy at the time. In 1991, Yugoslavia disintegrated, and in 1992, that led to a civil war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as a minor genocide. As for Panama, in December of 1989, troops were sent in to remove the autocratic general Manuel Noriega. Their alleged purpose was to stop Noriega from using his country as a drug pipeline to the United States. U.S. troops remained until elections established a more credible government. In August of 1990, Saddam Hussein, Iraq's dictator, invaded Kuwait for oil. They threatened the Western oil sources in Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. A coalition of UN members gathered to pressure Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait, which had very little effect. In January 1991, Operation Desert Storm began, where more than 500,000 Americans were joined by military units from 28 other nations. There were 5 weeks of relentless airstrikes, followed by an invasion, and after only 100 hours of fighting on the ground, Iraq conceded defeat. It was the first war in which American women served in a combat role. Domestically, Clarence Thomas was nominated to the Supreme Court. You see him pictured on the right. He was a conservative on judicial issues, but during his nomination process, there were charges of sexual harassment against him. The Republicans overlooked those and confirmed him to the U.S. Supreme Court. As for taxes and the economy, the federal budget deficits of more than $250 billion a year, and Bush accepted the Democratic Congress's proposed $133 billion in new taxes, which increased the top income tax rate to 31% and raised federal excise taxes on beer, wine, cigarettes, gasoline, luxury cars, and yachts. A recession started in 1990 due to all of this. Republicans felt betrayed when Bush violated his campaign pledge of no new taxes. Bush also signed in the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, which prohibited discrimination against any citizen with physical and mental disabilities in hiring, transportation, and public accommodation. He also signed in the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, which were designed to control air pollution on a national level. They addressed the problems of acid rain, ozone depletion, and toxic air pollution. They established a national permit program for stationary sources and increased enforcement authority, as well as established new auto gasoline reformulation requirements.